Okay, fabulous. And Zoom as well. Welcome, everyone. Tonight's class is a 4-part series leading us right into the holiday of Pesach, which is 30 days after Purim. And that's exactly where we are in between Purim and Pesach. And the first question, my friends, if you understand the whole Pesach story is, why did God make us slaves in Egypt? What a strange, unusual, and you could say cruel way for our nation, the Jewish people, to begin our journey through thousands of years of Jewish history. A slave nation. I mean, most nations out there begin in a pretty much exciting way. They conquer a land, they overtake a nation, they conquer the territory, they win wars, they put in flags. And we, the Jewish people, our nationhood begins in a place called Mitzrayim, which covers the territory of modern day Egypt. Why? Why couldn't we have a more exciting beginning? Why do we have to go 210 years stuck in this very challenging place called Mitzrayim before the whole plague started, which we'll be discussing in the coming weeks, and before we got dropped off in a desert and received the Torah and end up in the land of Israel? What is the secret, my friends, of this entire story, that it needed to begin in a pretty unceremonial way of being slaves? I'm talking about brick makers and schleppers and builders. The answer to this question, my friends, hope will show you, is going to be so important that it's almost going to be impossible to understand who the Jewish people are today in 2021 without understanding why for 210 years, well, maybe not the beginning of the 210 years, but definitely a major chunk of the 210 years that we were in Egypt, we were slaves. Avadim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Mitzrayim. And when we talk about Egypt, Egypt is a physical, geographical location. But my friends, more than it being just a place where we were, Egypt represented something else. The word for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim actually is a couple of words that are stuck together. Meitzer Yam. We were Meitzer, trapped, confined. And the rabbis tell us that Egypt wasn't just a physical prison, which it was. I guess you could call it the North Korea of its day. No one got out. Once you were there, you were pretty much trapped, especially if you were a slave and had no resources and you weren't free to just walk out. But as well as being a physical place, Egypt was also a spiritual confine as well, say the rabbis. We were trapped spiritually. And the two are connected. Because if you're a slave and you don't own your own time and you're working as a slave for someone else, what are you going to do? You want to go and meditate? You want to go and connect to the God of the Hebrews? You can't do that. There's no time off. You're on 24/7. And that's how the Jewish people lived. And we were broken. God broke us through this experience. And the Egyptians were the tools that God used to do that. But why? What is the secret to the Jewish people beginning with slavery? Well, the obvious first answer we have to look at is it makes us humble. You see, we the Jewish people have been very successful and given so much to the world over thousands of years of Jewish history. And we could be really, really full of ourselves at this point and be like, you know what? We're great business people and accountants and lawyers, and we started many companies. And God says, oh, you think it's your power that did that? Do you know how you started? You started as a brick maker and schlepper. Now that is going to humble anyone. There's another reason though, and that is we, through history, are going to see, the Jewish people have seen, and they're going to see a lot of challenges and difficulties that many other nations are going to go through. And at certain points of history, we're on low, and that sometimes we're on real highs. And when a person's on a high and in control, what's going to happen? We're going to look at the world and be like, who cares about them? They can handle it. But no, we know that we started being slaves ourselves, and that is going to make us conscientious and rahmanim, people who have the attribute of mercy, and saying, wow, look at that poor nation. Look at those poor people. You know what? We were like that, and we got out of it. God redeemed us from Egypt, from Meitzer, Yam, being trapped as though we're trapped in water. We were able to get out. And if we can do it, you can do it too. Let us teach you how terrible dictators are and how bad tyranny is. And yeah, you got to step an army. But you know what? That army, like the Jewish army in Israel today, can be a merciful army. No matter what they tell you, the Israeli army is the most merciful army that exists today for sure, and may have existed ever in world history. Because we are Rahmanim. We are a merciful people. And the reason is because we were given a Torah, and we started our whole Jewish journey as slaves. So that when we see people suffering, we're like, yeah, been there, done that, and we're behind you. And that's why you always see Jewish people always feeling responsible, wanting to save people and save animals and help, and always championing the David versus the Goliath, sometimes correctly and sometimes inappropriately, but we're always there backing the underhorse. That, my friends, is the secret to Jewish slavery. Because we went through it, we know what it's like, and that's going to have a major impact upon us. And the rabbis give us 3 reasons, in addition to the 2 we just looked at, but you can fold those reasons into these 3. Why God made us into slaves at the beginning of our peoplehood in order to become the Jewish people. Number 1, this allowed the Jewish people to build our trust in God. Number 2, this allowed us to build a close relationship with God. And number 3 reason, and this is unbelievable, but this is what the rabbis tell us. The number 3 reason that the Jewish people began as slaves in Egypt, very humble and degrading experience, is in order to show the Jewish people throughout history that an overzealous pursuit of materialism has big and sometimes dangerous consequences. I'm going to get to all 3 in turn. Let's start with the first one. In order to build trust in God. You know, Abraham was told that his descendants would be slaves in a country that wasn't theirs. He wasn't told that it was Egypt. It was actually the Egyptians who volunteered to take on that position and treated us really badly. They didn't have to treat us that badly. They chose to kill us and torture us and beat us and make us into slaves. And God said to Abraham, I am God who brought you out of Ur Kasdim, and I'm going to give you this land of Israel that you're going to inherit it. And Abraham turned around to God and says, God, how do I really know this is going to happen? Wow, you, Abraham, you don't have trust in God? Right? This is the God that you spent your whole life discovering. You were spreading ethical and moral monotheism for decades. And all of a sudden, what do you say? I don't know, God. Are you really going to give my descendants the land of Israel? Say the rabbis in the Gemara something unbelievable. There was a little lack of faith in Abraham and therefore his descendants. In order to build up this lack of faith, they had to be put in a place that would allow them to build up their faith in God. And that was Egypt. Egypt was chosen, and slavery was chosen as the mechanism to help us build faith. Why? Why would that be chosen? Why couldn't God have put us on a nice, beautiful desert island, surrounded by lovely waters, singing songs, kumbaya, and then said, welcome Jews, you're now the Jewish people. Why do we have to get beaten into submission? And the answer to that is absolutely fascinating. You know, one of the other names that the Egyptian experience is called in the Torah is the Kor HaBarzel. Kor HaBarzel, which means the iron furnace. The iron furnace. That's what Egypt was for us. An iron furnace. What's an iron furnace exactly? An iron crucible. Well, says Rashi, the famous commentator from 1,000 years ago, this iron furnace, this crucible, is used to purify gold and silver. You see, what you do is you take the raw gold or raw silver, and it's got a little bit of schmutz mixed up in it. You know what schmutz is? It's schmutz. And you throw it into a strong heat, and the dross, the stuff you don't want, floats away from the gold. You scoop it away and discard it. So too, the Jewish people in Egypt, they needed to go through a fire cleansing experience. And what this was going to do was going to separate those people who were worthy, who went through this tremendous challenge of faith and despair, to be worthy of leaving Egypt and receive the Torah 50 days later after leaving Egypt. And so the whole Egyptian experience was this cleansing, purifying challenge. And think to your life as well. You've all achieved things in your life I'm sure that you're proud of. Some of those achievements came when things were amazing and everyone was happy with you and your spouse and your kids, or maybe at work, everything was great. But sometimes you went through tremendous challenges and difficulties, and from that furnace of fire and challenge, greatness came out of you. And parts of your personality had to be almost literally burnt out. That, my friends, is what happened to the Jewish people in Egypt. We went through a Kor HaBarzel. We went through this terrible, challenging experience of being slaves. Part of that was that throughout history, we're going to be like, I know what slaves go through, and I'm going to stop slavery to the best of my ability. But in addition to that, it's going to teach us that when things get really, really challenging for us as a people, sometimes greatness is waiting right around the corner. And by the way, you should know, not every Hebrew in Egypt was up to the challenge. The Torah tells us that the Jewish people left chamushim. Chamushim is an unusual word. Rashi gives a couple of possibilities what that word actually means. One opinion is chamushim means armed. The Jewish men who left Egypt realized that, you know what, it's a hostile territory, Sinai desert, meeting other nations, getting to Israel, they're going to come and war with us. And so they left armed. That's fair. But then Rashi gives a second answer. And by the way, when Rashi gives a second answer, usually he's not so happy with the first one. And the second answer of Rashi is only chamushim, which means chamesh, a fifth. Only 20% of the Hebrews left Egypt. That means that 80% of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who became the Jewish people who were in Egypt, only 20% left and 80% disappeared. Some say they died out during the plague of darkness. And some say when Moses said, let's go, let's do this, we're going to leave and go to a desert. They're like, a desert? I mean, it's bad here in Egypt with slaves, but that's a scary place. Do I really want to be in a desert? And most of them said, no thanks. We'll just take our chances and stay here. Now, those people, genetically and racially, somehow ethnically, are related to us, but they didn't become the Jewish people because they didn't reach Mount Sinai. Only the 20% that left, they were able to be pulled out of this iron furnace, eventually became the Jewish people. And these were the ones who had the greatest faith. Only 1 in 5, only 20% were able to stand up to Moses and say, we have no idea what's coming, but we've seen great miracles in Egypt. We saw the 10 plagues, and we saw what happened to Pharaoh, and we saw what happened to all the Egyptians. You know what? We're with you. We're leaving. That took a tremendous amount of faith, and that faith didn't come from nowhere. That came from hundreds of years of being slaves and seeing the hand of God in the most desperate and difficult challenges that came their way. And so the Egyptian experience was there to teach us that no matter how bad things get, There's always a chance that God can turn things around. And that lesson, my friends, has stayed with us for centuries and millennia. We've all met Holocaust survivors, for example, who went through the most worst horrors. And you'll hear their stories. I've interviewed many of them and put some of them online. And they're like, no matter what happened, I always felt that God was with me and a better time was going to come. It was bad and horrible, but we had faith. We had faith that God was going to redeem us and take us out of this place. And some of these people lost families and friends and parents and children. And yet after the war, they were still God believers. And they were still able to get remarried and have more kids. There was a woman who died a number of years ago here in New York. She survived the Holocaust and left 2,000 descendants. That power came, and she was the first to admit it, from the beginning to the Jewish people. No matter how bad it is, we have faith that we're going to get through the most difficult challenges. That faith came to us initially, from the Egyptian slave experience. It's downloaded into our spiritual DNA. Okay. There's another aspect we said. Not only does the Egyptian experience do that, it also, as in help us have faith in God, it also helps us and helped us build a close relationship with God. How can that be? I mean, let's be honest. It was God who put us in that situation in the first place. Why would us being tortured and beaten and horrible circumstances of Egypt for hundreds of years, why would that in any way bring us closer to God when we knew it was God who put us there in the first place? Well, it's very much like when you take your kids to be inoculated. I say, come on kids, we've got to go for our shots. We got vaccines to take. And the kid's like, I don't want to go. I said, you got to go. And you take this young child and you drag them. And what do? The doctor comes with his long, scary needle, and the kids start shouting and screaming. And you got to hold the kid down. Like, you got to take your shots. This is good for you. And the kid's crying and screaming. And the doctor gives the shot to the kid. And the kid's like, that hurt. I mean, not as much as I thought it would, but that still hurt me a lot. And then the kid comes running into your arms for a hug and a kiss. Why? I was the one who booked the doctor's appointment. I'm the one who's paying for them to get the shot. I'm the one who's holding them down when they get it, because deep down the child knows that it's unpleasant, but somehow this is good for me. God is our Father in heaven. And God says, you know what? You need this inoculation. I know it's unpleasant. I know you're suffering. But there's something about this Egyptian inoculation that's going to keep you free from diseases of the soul for thousands of years. And once a year, you're going to get together with your family and you're going to talk about it. And you're going to hold up this matzah that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks and say, this is the bread of affliction that my ancestors ate and they had faith and they got out. And this is the maror, the bitter herbs. And this year has been a bitter time. But we know that we can get out because we're free people. Avadimiyinu. But Hashem took us out l'chirut. He took us out to freedom. We are now free. And that is something to be thankful for. And you can't appreciate freedom. You can't appreciate the taste of freedom until you've tasted the bitterness of slavery. And that has been with us, the Jewish people, whether we know it or not, for thousands and thousands of years. Rabbi Dessler he was a great rabbi who lived before, during, and after the Second World War. And he gives a beautiful, powerful, deep understanding of this. I hope you appreciate his words. I'm going to read some of his words for you that he talks about. And Rabbi Dessler says, every time there is a need to give a righteous person the possibility of rising to a very high spiritual level, he's always thrown in to the worst, challenging environment. And Egypt was the most spiritually defiled place in the world. And Goshen, where the Jewish people resided, living among the Egyptians, they weren't in a little Jewish community somewhere. They were dispersed among the Egyptians. We know that because God had to jump over, Pasach, over the houses of the Egyptians, of the Jewish people, in order to kill the firstborn Egyptians. So we were stuck in the most vile, contaminated, challenging environment. Then God turned around and said, from this, you will become great. And they needed this to accept the Torah. We could never have appreciated the power and beauty of the Torah had we not gone to this terrible, challenging environment. Lefum tsar agra, said the rabbi. It's a very classic Aramaic statement. Through the challenge comes the greatness. And therefore we cried out to Hashem. When we were being beaten by the Egyptians, we said, Hashem, why are you doing this to us? Why are you torturing us? This builds that relationship that's with us for a long, long time. And that power of faith and prayer that we had to cry out to God from the midst of our slavery, Mimamakim, Kratich Hashem, from the depths, has been with us for a long time. And you hear many people throughout history who've said, I'm going through such a big challenge, but I know that when I cry out to Hashem, eventually, somehow, some way, my redemption is going to come. So that's number 2. Number 1 reason, well, we've seen actually more than one. You got a few extra bonuses today. Number 1 reason why Hashem put us as slaves is so that when we see slavery throughout history of other people being attacked, we're going to understand and we're going to help them. And we're going to be the redeemers of the world, the moral voice of world history from our beginnings. We've also mentioned that we're going to build faith. Abraham had a lack of faith, and that passed on to his descendants. And the faith, by seeing what happened to us and feeling those experiences in Egypt, we're going to see that the redemption purifies us, inoculated us, faith-wise towards God. And also, we're going to cry out to God. We're going to build a relationship through God, which can only come from the most difficult and challenging circumstances. And that's the Mitzar. That's why we couldn't go directly from Egypt to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. We needed 49 days of preparation to try to get us out of that slave mentality. And you know what? We never actually got out of it. That slave mentality that we had for hundreds of years, unfortunately, stayed with us. And that's why we'll see that the Jewish men who left Egypt never actually made it into the land of Israel. You can take the Jew out of Egypt, but it's much harder to take Egypt out of the Jew. Now that, my friends, is a real challenge that the Jewish people never fully got. I'd like to give you one more reason before we finish as to why we began as slaves. And this is based upon a midrash that tells us something really unusual that Pharaoh did in order to get buy-in from the Jewish people to become slaves in the first place. And I'll tell you what Pharaoh said. He said, go, my friends. He wore a golden chain with a golden brick at the end of it and said, Hebrews, you go build buildings we need here in Egypt, and I'm going to pay you gold like this brick over here. Every brick you pick up is like a golden brick. And the Jewish people said, fantastic. We're in. Making money? Who doesn't want that? Money gives us power, gives us honor. And off they went. Very soon afterwards, they turned the deal and said, you've been doing this for money? No more money? You're going to have to make these buildings for no pay. The movement from a good worker to a slave is a pretty quick descent. And that's what happened. And soon after that, Pharaoh said, not only now am I not going to pay you, you're going to have to make bricks. And so the Jewish men had to wait up all night and search for straw and mud and pitch in order to make bricks, and then spend the entire day building the quota that they had managed to keep up while they were being paid. This was torturous behavior. And if they didn't do it, they were beaten. The rabbis tell us something unbelievable. There's something else that was demonstrated to us, the Jewish people. And I want to hear this clearly because I don't want to misunderstand what I'm saying, my dear friends. This is very important. And that is, the Jewish people from the days of Abraham were blessed. We're blessed because we have a mission. And that mission is to increase divine consciousness in this world. That's what Abraham did. Abraham brought guests into his home, into his tent, and said, come, eat and drink, and let's talk about giving up idol worship and following the one true God of Israel. And he was really successful. But you know what? It wasn't cheap. Abraham was actually a pretty wealthy individual because it costs to goodness. Charities don't run on nothing. You've got to fundraise, you've got to make money, you've got to be successful. In order to make an impact in the world, you need resources. Look at Israel. Israel has wonderful, great resources, and that enables it to spread goodness to its people and the entire world. However, there's a threat that comes with that. The threat that comes with great financial success is the possibility that you become obsessed with it, and your entire raison d'etre, your entire focus in life, is not money as a means to an end, which is what it's meant to be. The blessings that were given to Abraham and his descendants were, among other things, great financial success, and that should be used as a means to an end to achieve greatness in this world. For many people, unfortunately, it became an end in and of itself. And what did we do? Unfortunately, many people just treat money as a means to an end, and as an end in and of itself, and just spend it, don't give charity, don't help other people, and just lock down and work internally and don't want to share blessings with other people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and King David and Moses and all the other great heroes and heroines and Esther and Miriam from Jewish history, my friends. One other lesson that we learned from being slaves in Egypt is don't think that money is going to save you from your problems. Money is a tool. In Hebrew, one of the words for money is zuzim. Right? Zuzim, from the word zaz. What does zaz mean? It moves from place to place. Sometimes you have it, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes we as a people are financially doing amazingly, and sometimes we're in the gutter. Don't put your faith in physical, material wealth, because it comes and it goes. As someone said, when she lost a lot of her jewels, I think it was Elizabeth Taylor, and someone said, "Are you crying right now?" And she's like, "I don't cry for anything that won't cry for me." Happens to be a very, very Jewish idea. Materialism for us is a tool. They're like soldiers, our financial resources, to help other people, whether it's to bring divine consciousness, whether it's to give charity, to help an organization, to make Shabbat, Jewish holidays. It's not cheap. However, don't misuse it. Focus it and channel it, and know that you don't just work to make money in order to work to make money, and that's my entire being. We are the people who are Rahmanim. We went through slavery. We know what it was like to live under a nation who just made us work for no money and took all of our resources and left us in the gutter. And we don't want to go there again. And we know what it's like to just work and work and work and get no spiritual benefit by working at all. So what do? We stop once a week. We keep Shabbat. One day a week, I'm not going to talk about money. I'm not going to talk about finances. I'm going to be a free person. And that, my friends, is true freedom. True freedom is someone who's able to stop work and be like, today is not work day. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about my business. It's God day. That was a secret that was downloaded into our spiritual DNA from our very earliest beginnings. And that is, we are not slaves anymore. We are free people. We are the Am HaNivchar, the chosen people, who may be blessed throughout history at times with great financial and successful wealth. Look at King Solomon. King Solomon is the wisest of people. And he warned us so many times in so many of his writings, don't put your faith in money. And don't cry for it. And don't spend your entire life pursuing it. Because eventually, that beautiful house you built, someone else is going to live in it. And those cars, they're going to wear out and go away. And all that fancy stuff is going to disappear. Use your financial resources and blessings for the good of yourself, but especially the good of others. And that, my friends, is a precious lesson we learned by being slaves for hundreds of years to Pharaoh in Egypt. We don't want to be slaves for the rest of our history. That's not what God put us here for. God put us into this world in order to be free people. And free people are not slaves. The money works for us. we don't work for it. So there are reasons why God started the Jewish people. The whole, what culminated with the exodus from Egypt, all the great miracles, started with slavery. It keeps us humble. It gives us great faith. It shows us that people are going to suffer and we need to have their back because we know what they went through. And it tells us that the excessive pursuit of materialism is not what's going to bring us happiness in this world. It's not what you take, it's what you give. That's why we all come to this world with our hands closed as babies, and we all leave this world with our hands open after a lifetime of giving. Okay, that's part 1 of 4. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the miracles that happened right before we left Egypt, which also are going to have a profound lesson on us as a nation for the rest of Jewish history. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'll see you all, God willing, at 12 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be having a class which, I don't remember the title though, but definitely look out for that. It'll be on 12 o'clock tomorrow. And next week, Pesach Part 2. Thank you all very, very much. Hello, boy chick. You okay?